Hi everyone, I hope you're well. Welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass, your weekly guide to developing commercial insight that goes beyond just the headlines. Each week we take one major story and break it down to help you progress through three levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced commercial awareness. Whether you're just starting or already have some understanding, this program is here to help you think like a commercial lawyer. By the end of today's session, you'll have practical insights you can use in applications and in interviews. My name is Daniel Shepherd, and I'm a law conversion student and a future trainee solicitor. Today, I'm joined by Henry, a senior associate at Thrive Law, who has extensive experience in commercial contracts. Henry will give us a guide through the story of a class action lawsuit facing Apple and Microsoft, highlighting the business and legal implications for aspiring lawyers like yourself. So, hi Henry, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad, Dan, but thank you for having me.
Good, good. I'm excited to have you. So let's break down the story. Could you give us an oversight of this week's story, please?
Yeah, for sure. So Apple and Microsoft are both facing class action lawsuits here in the UK, with Microsoft being accused of overcharging business users who are using rival cloud services, whilst Apple is facing claims that its app store commissions are anti-competitive. We can get into this more, but class actions are primarily where groups that are facing similar grievances, for example, those businesses who are allegedly using rival cloud services, can bring claims against a company as a collective.
And in this story, what are some of the key terms or concepts that we should understand before going into it further?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the key things to understand is actually what a class action lawsuit is. You may have come across these on TV shows like Suits, where they throw around phrases like this all the time, but you may not actually understand what they mean, particularly here in the UK. So effectively, they're kind of like mass actions that allow groups of people as a collective to bring a claim as a group. And in the UK, there are two main ways to do this under the consumer rights legislation. The firstly is an opt-in action, which is effectively what it says on the tin. You opt in if you meet the certain criteria to qualify for that action. You need to actively say, yes, I'm going to agree to join this. Alternatively is the opt-out action, which is something we see more of in the US. And these automatically include everybody who is qualified to join that mass action. And you have the onus on you to opt out of that claim, which is why we generally see that the opt-out actions generally have more people in them, because people forget to opt out, kind of like opting out of unsubscribe or unsubscribing from sort of mailing newsletters.
So, for these sort of lawsuits, why do they matter to businesses like Apple and Microsoft for both opt-in and opt-out lawsuits?
Yeah, so for the businesses themselves, if you take two huge corporations like Apple and Microsoft, one of the key issues is they can be quite financially draining for the company. One, to defend. Obviously, you've got a huge mass action claim being brought against you, which could potentially have hundreds, thousands of claimants. So if they are successful in their claim, the payout will also be pretty hefty. So not only are you having to pay lawyer fees to defend the claim, you're also having to potentially pay out huge sums to lots of people, across a collective of people, sorry. Additionally, there's also a reputational risk to those organizations as well. For example, these are huge, high-profile cases. Apple, Microsoft, two of the biggest companies on the planet. So there's a huge reputational risk that if they lose these cases, it's not going to look great for them. But from a law firm perspective, ultimately taking on these cases either is the claimants for the mass action, or you're acting for Apple or Microsoft. These cases are kind of huge, high risk, but kind of high reward cases.
I think that really does nicely transition us from the beginner to the intermediate level. So as a reminder for the beginner level, the goal is to understand the basics, what's happening and why it's broadly important. And this foundation is crucial for moving into deeper and business legal impacts. So now that we understand the basics, let's dive into how these lawsuits affect companies like Apple and Microsoft, and what role law firms play in helping them navigate these challenges.
Yeah, for sure. So as we kind of briefly just touched on then, two of the biggest risks that we should be aware of are in terms of mass actions can cause significant harm to corporations through the financial implications of the claims, defending them and potential payouts, and also public image. There's a recent case in terms of Johnson & Johnson and the talcum powder scandal, whether or not it's sort of a carcinogenic or not, resulted in them having to pay billions in settlement fees. And they also had to recall a huge number of products, which if we take Microsoft and Apple, that if the similar happened to them, they had to pay billions whilst they're huge companies, hugely profitable. That's still going to be a huge financial hit and having to recall products. Or if we take Apple, for example, and its App Store commission sort of profit split in terms of, I think it's 30% to the companies, the developers, and 70% to Apple. No, other way around, 70% to the developers, 30% to Apple. If that changes, that's potentially going to affect Apple's entire business model, and the sort of the reputation impact that can have would be huge. But I think if we take it from a law firm perspective, if you are defending one of those claims, not just from a litigation perspective, you also have the PR, sort of the reputation crisis management element to it as well, which a lot of huge commercial firms now also provide services in that space.
So what are some of the legal challenges that law firms will encounter when coordinating such large-scale cases?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the biggest risks, I wouldn't say risk, actually, that's the wrong word. One of the biggest challenges law firms face is that mass actions, by definition, have a mass number of people bringing these claims. So there's lots of coordination needing to be required. You could potentially have hundreds of thousands, as we touched on, claimants all bringing claims. So we need to understand all the background, whether or not they meet certain criteria, and all of that, which for a law firm is going to be intensely demanding in terms of time, the people that you resource on the case, and all of that sort of project management can be hugely demanding. We're seeing lots of law firms implement tech to some extent, legal tech, to assist with that, which may help sort of the litigation side of things in the management. But that, I think, is one of the biggest struggles or challenges that a law firm will face in terms of navigating these sort of mass actions.
So I think that does lead us quite nicely into how technology and things like legal tech and AI have influenced how firms manage mass litigation. Could you delve into that a little bit more, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we're seeing so many exciting new sort of legal tech, AI-focused platforms being introduced, and how that tech is implemented into sort of law firms include sort of case management tools to actively track this kind of litigation. We're seeing e-signing platforms, and we're also seeing electronic portals that have sort of made the logistics of the mass claim sort of logistics and all of the admin side of that a lot more efficient in terms of time and costs.
I think that doesn't nicely wrap up the intermediate level. So at the intermediate level, think about how businesses are affected and how law firms support them. This is where you can connect commercial issues to practical legal work. So for the final advanced level, let's think like strategically. what a proactive advice law firms would offer to their clients in cases like this, not only to manage such risks, but also like seize potential opportunities as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think if we let's do it on the basis that the law firm client is the collective, the mass claimants, rather than the defendants, the companies, because I think those risks are kind of, I guess logistically, they're less of a challenge in terms of they're just dealing with one entity rather than a mass collective of people. So I think some of the biggest issues are in terms of litigation funding. We all know that litigation is very expensive, and these cases can go on, particularly cases of this size, for quite some time. So there's a risk in terms of, one, how these cases are funded, who's funding it, and also cash flow, particularly if, as we just mentioned, these cases are going on for potentially years. How do law firms get money from that over that time, and to basically be able to pay for all of the usual stuff that you would expect a law firm to be paying for. We're seeing a lot more litigation funding outfits helping in that space, so mass claims can be funded in that way. And we're seeing, yes, third-party litigation funders, to do this and to ensure that claims that couldn't otherwise be bought, similar to the post office scandal, can now be bought. But again, that is a risk for law firms to do that. And then not only are law firms waiting for their money, they also have to take into consideration that these litigation funders will also be taking a cut of any potential sort of settlement fees.
So law firms need to balance mitigating their losses, but also weighing up the risks with, obviously, in such large actions, they'll be highly profitable, especially with the hours and stuff. But yeah.
It's a huge risk, particularly for firms that are primarily litigation heavy. But of course, that's something that the firms need to be assessing. And as we touched on, if it's a huge case like Microsoft and Apple, the potential PR you're going to get off the back of that, the potential success you could have off of that, if successful, in terms of bringing in a successful claim, it's huge.
So what sort of legal strategies can firms help clients? What legal strategies can firms give to clients in order to create a competitive advantage in these sort of claims?
I think it's really kind of understanding. If we take these two cases, because they are so kind of high profile, and because there is clearly standing in grounds to bring this case, to bring these claims, sorry, as a mass claim. The clients sort of, it's basically trying to get as many people as possible who are affected by these claims to kind of bring these claims effectively. But there are still sort of strict requirements that have to be met. It's still litigation to an extent, so all of the usual rules around litigation still need to be taken into consideration. There are also concerns around whether or not litigation funding agreements, referencing the third-party litigation fund, as we spoke about earlier, can sort of actually be enforceable. That's something that the Supreme Courts are discussing. And also just normal sort of strategy considerations that law firms should be having with their clients around sort of success, how it's going to work, probability of actually bringing in successful claims, how the courts will look at this. This is something firms will all need to be considering when deciding whether or not to sort of move forward with a mass claim for whatever that may be, if we look beyond just the Microsoft and Apple mass claims.
So do these mass claims fit into a broader trend in like future lawsuits? And how should businesses prepare for future litigation risks?
I think it's difficult to say in terms of whether or not we're going to see an influx of mass claims or mass actions. But I think the trend is, if we look at sort of the consumer rights legislation, is that there is a growing sort of appetite for these kinds of claims to be bought. But I think, again, it's difficult to advise in terms of mass actions for sort of individuals. If I was advising, say, a business, for example, I think you would just be thinking around, I'm not a litigator. I'm primarily focused on contracts, so trying to make sure they're as tight as possible to avoid litigation. But I think it's just taking a usual sensible approach to what is our probability of success? How likely are we to successfully bring this mass claim? And I think you kind of take from that the more people that there are that are going to be or have been found to be affected by this problem, then from that we can see that the chances of the probability of actually being successful is arguably going to be higher.
And for these kind of high risk and high profile cases, what are some of the challenges and opportunities for law firms that are taking these on?
I think, again, the challenges are primarily around the funding. As we spoke about, that these claims can go on for years, as we've seen with the post office scandal, the toll compounder scandal. These aren't things that are settled in 6 months, 12 months. Particularly the bigger cases and with the sort of the courts and generally how long these processes can take, that there is a risk that the firm may not be paid for quite some time. So assuming there are other clients of this firm, assuming there are other sort of income generators, but if this is like the big case, then of course there's a risk that actually, when is the firm going to get this payout? If the firm is going to get this payout, because it needs to be successful to an extent. And then I guess that's balanced against the potential payoff of the claim is successful. You get a huge payout from that. You get the PR off of it. You get your firm's name attached to this huge case, and then that in turn could potentially bring more work, whether or not that's just more mass actions or if that's just more general sort of litigation. But then, of course, if you are focusing a lot of your energy and resources on a mass action where you might have a lot of trainees going through portals, checking that each of the claimants sort of meet certain criteria, make sure that you've got certain information from all of the claimants to be able to put the case to sort of challenge and all of the sort of good litigation stuff. That's quite a lot of resource. So if you're putting loads of people into that, how do you resource all of the other matters, claims that the firm is dealing with? Is that where we use sort of more AI, more tech? So whilst there are a lot of challenges in terms of what we've just spoken about, there are also lots of opportunities to introduce sort of new workflows, to introduce new technology, to streamline how cases are managed, which I think is a really exciting kind of prospect for firms that focus more in this space.
And I guess with how large these claims are and with the longevity of them, we'll see that change over time with how they kind of streamline within these cases, which is quite exciting to see.
Yeah, I think the cases themselves potentially will still go on for quite like longer than traditional litigation, in a sense where we've got the mass action just because of the sheer number of people that are bringing claims, hundreds, thousands potentially. And just by sort of definition of that, is going to take a while to process all of that information and sort of collate it and share it with relevant parties. But I completely agree that sort of AI legal tech will help streamline that process. I think the court process will still take time, just by nature of how the courts operate, and that's an issue in itself in terms of sort of legal funding, court process, staffing, and all of that stuff. But yeah, for sure, legal tech will definitely help in the process.
And now, before we conclude the advanced section, are there any other areas in this that you'd like to cover, or anything that we have missed so far, or anything that could really push someone to the edge of that advanced level?
No, I would just definitely check out the sort of, if you want to go more into the litigation space, check out the firms that you're applying for, look at the kind of work that they do. Do they focus on this area? Do they work with sort of US companies? Do they work, do they have US offices where mass action claims are a lot more sort of, normal is the wrong word, but they come up a lot more frequently, just to make sure that you kind of fully understand what that firm does. So when it comes to going in interview and you're talking about, let's say, the Microsoft and Apple cases, you can really sort of fit that in with the firm's work that it's doing, how this is relevant, what the implications are going to be, if the firm picked up this work or got similar work to that.
That's great. Well, thank you, Henry, so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. At the advanced level, it's about thinking like a commercial advisor, anticipating future challenges and helping clients position themselves advantageously. So thank you everyone for joining us today at the Commercial Awareness Compass. Remember that commercial awareness isn't just about keeping up with the news. It's about understanding why events matter to clients and how law firms provide strategic value. Whether you're at the beginning, intermediate or advanced level, always ask yourself, how does this impact clients and what can a law firm do to help? Join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. Until then, prepare without the panic. Thank you.